You are listening to Rudolf Steiner Audio.com. This is a reading of the collected works of Rudolf Steiner, Volume 1, entitled in this edition, Nature's Open Secret, Introductions to Goethe's Scientific Writings. On August 18th, 1787, Goethe wrote to Knebel from Italy. Footnote, Carl Ludwig von Knebel, 1744 to 1834, German poet and translator, was associated with Goethe and Schiller in their literary circle in Weimar. End of footnote. Quote, after what I have seen of plants and fishes around Naples and in Sicily, I would be greatly tempted, if I were 10 years younger, to make a journey to India, not for the purpose of discovering anything new, but to observe in my own way what has already been discovered. Close quote. These words provide the viewpoint from which to consider Goethe's scientific works. For him, it was never a question of discovering new facts, but of opening up a new perspective and viewing nature in a particular way. It is true that Goethe made a number of great discoveries, such as the intermaxillary bone and the vertebral theory of the skull in osteology, the inner identity of plant organs with the leaf in botany, and so on. But the animating soul that imbued all these particular achievements was the magnificent view of nature upon which they are based. In Goethe's study of organisms, one great discovery overshadows all else: the discovery of the nature of the organism itself. Goethe expounded the principle of how an organism manifests as it does, the causes leading to the outer expressions of life. Indeed, he illuminated everything related to the principles involved in such matters. Footnote, those who from the outset declare such a goal to be unattainable will never understand Goethe's views of nature. But those who study his views in an unbiased way and leave this question open will certainly reach an affirmative answer. Some may well be led to doubt this assertion by certain remarks of Goethe himself, such as, quote, without presumptuously wishing to discover the primal driving forces of nature, we have focused on the manifestation of those forces, through which the plant gradually transforms one and the same organ, close quote. Continue footnote, such statements by Goethe, however, are never intended to deny the possibility, in principle, of coming to know the essential nature of things. He was simply being careful not to make premature judgments about the physical, mechanical conditions upon which the organism depends. For he knew very well that it takes time to resolve such questions. Rudolf Steiner, end of footnote. From the very beginning, this was the goal of Goethe's efforts in the organic sciences. As he pursued this goal, his discoveries occurred as of themselves. He had to make them in order not to be hindered in his further striving. Natural science before Goethe was unaware of the essential nature of living phenomena. It simply investigated organisms with regard to the composition of their parts and external characteristics, just as one investigates inorganic phenomena. Consequently, that older science often interpreted details incorrectly and presented them in a false light. Investigation of the particulars themselves cannot, of course, reveal any such error. Interpretive judgments can only be made after we have first understood the organism, because the particulars, considered separately, do not contain the principle that explains them. They can be explained only through the nature of the whole, because it is the whole that gives them meaning and significance. Footnote, intrinsic in Goethe's scientific method is that its explanations move from the whole to the parts, from the central principle to the outer particulars. That's the editor, end of footnote. It was not until after Goethe had discovered the nature of the whole that he realized those interpretations were erroneous. They could not be reconciled with his theory of living beings. They contradicted it. Before he could go any further, he had to eliminate such preconceptions. This was the case with the intermaxillary bone. Footnote: Goethe knew that the intermaxillary bone must also be present in the human being, only because he had recognized the fundamental formative principle, the, in quotes, type that gives rise to the human form and the forms of the higher animals. Editor. End of footnote. Facts that are valuable and interesting only if one has a theory like the vertebral nature of the skull were unknown to previous natural science. All these hindrances had to be cleared away through individual discoveries. In Goethe's case, therefore, these discoveries were never ends in themselves, but were always necessary to corroborate a great thought, to confirm his central discovery. We cannot deny that Goethe's contemporaries eventually made the same observations, and that perhaps all of them would be known today, even without Goethe's endeavors. But it would be even more difficult to deny that until today no one else has independently formulated in such an outstanding way his great discovery embracing all of organic nature. Indeed, even a somewhat satisfactory assessment of his discovery is still lacking. Footnote: we do not mean to say that Goethe has never been understood at all in this regard. On the contrary, we refer repeatedly in this text to people who seem to us to carry further and elaborate Goethean ideas. Among these are names such as Voigt, Naes von Esenbeck, Dalton, Senior and Junior, Schelver, C.G. Carus, Martius, and others. But these people based their systems on the views laid down in Goethe's writings, and one cannot say of them that they would have arrived at their concepts without Goethe. On the other hand, contemporaries of Goethe, for example, Josephi in Göttingen, in the case of the intermaxillary bone, and Ocken in the case of the vertebral theory, arrived at their discoveries independently. Rudolf Steiner, end of footnote. Whether Goethe was the first to discover a fact, or only rediscovered it, seems irrelevant when viewed in this fundamental way. For the fact only gains real significance because of the way he fits it into his view of nature. Thus far, this has been overlooked. The particulars have been overemphasized, and this has caused undue provocation and polemics. Goethe's conviction of nature's consistency has in fact often been pointed out, but without realizing that this is only a very insignificant characteristic of his views. In organic science, for example, the primary goal is to reveal the basis of this consistency. If we call it the type, then we must identify what the essential nature of the type is, according to Goethe. What is significant in the metamorphosis of plants, for example, is not the discovery of the single fact that leaf, calyx, corolla, and so on are identical organs. Rather, it is the magnificent thought structure of a living whole, consisting of mutually interpenetrating formative principles. This dynamic thought structure, which arises from that discovery, determines out of itself the details and individual stages of plant development. The greatness of this idea, which Goethe then sought to extend to the animal world as well, dawns on us only when we try to bring it to life in our own mind and attempt to rethink it. That is when we become aware of how this thought is the very nature of the plant itself, translated into the form of an idea, and living in our mind just as it lives in the object. We observe also that we bring an organism to life for ourselves, right down into its smallest parts, when we picture it not as a dead, finished object, but as evolving and becoming and never at rest within itself. As we endeavor in what follows to present in detail all that has been indicated here, we will also come to see the true relationship between the Goethean view of nature and that of our own time, especially modern evolutionary theory.